4.5 is a filler update. A filler update, in the case of Genshin, means an update where we don't get a map expansion or an update to the main storyline. Basically, an update that doesn't really add much in terms of content to the game. We still get a new character and a regional event, but that's about it, so it feels very empty. The general opinion about filler updates is that they're bad, but in this video, I'm here to convince you, or at least try to, that they're quite the opposite depending on where you are in the stage of the game, and why regardless of that, filler updates are still good for the game's longevity, and also how hoyoverse could improve the player base's opinion on filler patches. Based on what counts as a filler update and how Genshin's update schedule works, filler updates are usually doing the 0.3, the 0.5, and the 0.7 of each version. Out of the 9 updates we get for each region, 3 of them counts as filler updates, which isn't a bad ratio in my opinion. The filler updates tend to come after a map expansion. 0.3 is after the new region is released and the Archon quest is concluded. 0.5 is after Lantern Rite, which usually comes with a new map expansion, and 0.7 is after the interlude quest and a map expansion in 0.6. 0.8 doesn't really count as filler because it comes with a map expansion, just not a permanent one. Now, how does a filler patch benefit players? Genshin tends to release a lot of content during the first 3 updates of a new region: exploration, Archon quest, story quest, world quest, reputation, so on and so forth. You can obviously try to stay on top of it, but not everyone has that kind of time, so it gets put off until it all just piles up. Filler updates serve as a time to get through all of that. Since no new content is being put out, you can focus on the ones you haven't finished yet. If they were to release new content like a map expansion and a major story update every patch, your list of things to get done will only get longer. To me, filler patches are useful. There is 3 in between every new region, and you can spend the time preparing for the next region or just finishing up everything from the current and previous regions. Doing Sumeru, for example, the map expansion was so large I ended up not doing much, and now I've spent a good portion of Fontaine's filler updates to try to finish it, and it has been a good change of scenery from the blues of Fontaine. The regions won't necessarily be getting bigger, with Fontaine being smaller than Sumeru and all, but the content in those regions will increase, so some downtime can be useful to have. If you have somehow completed everything in Genshin and the lack of content is bugging you, you can use this time to focus on other things, like playing other games, focusing on school or work, doing your other hobbies, and maybe even take a break from Genshin itself, so you don't burn out and you can be excited for when new fresh content is released. Now, how does it benefit the developers? Genshin is a game that has had and still has a lot of work put into it. You could say, but they're $1 million company. Just because you're $1 million company doesn't mean content doesn't still take time and energy to make. It might take less than, say, if an indie developer was working on it, but it still takes time and energy. So giving the developers a patch where they don't have to release a new map expansion or an update to the main story can help not overwork them. People tend to have this misconception that because Genshin is being produced by $1 million company, hoyoverse should be able to push out content like there is no tomorrow, and that is just not true. Open world games are notoriously hard to make, and each region takes years to complete, at least to the level and quality that we're used to. Genshin releases a new region every year with minimal to no bugs. That by no means is an easy feat, even if they are $1 million company. A lot more goes into a game than people are willing to admit. Game companies are also notorious for having horrible work-life balances for their developers. If the developers are overworked any more than they probably already are, yes, we will be getting more content, but they will probably be buggy or of lower quality, and the developers will be having a horrible time making it. And I personally believe less of a good thing is better than more of a bad thing, and I wouldn't want more content at the detriment of the people behind the game. You could also make the argument, why doesn't hoyoverse just hire more people? That would make everything worse. They would have to spend time training those people. Also, the more people you have on your team, the more people you have to communicate with. There's only a certain amount of people you can have on your team before it starts becoming a negative rather than a positive. More people working on a game isn't always a good thing. How can they improve it? After all of that, there's still ways for them to make filler patches less hated and empty feeling. hoyoverse could use this filler patches as a time to fix the game's ever-growing list of issues. If the filler updates are filled with more quality of life updates, people will be more understanding. It not only shows that they're listening, but also reduces the amount of complaints they get about the game's optimization and there being no content for the update. I have to say, even during filler patches, there's never no content, just less of what we're used to. If we are guaranteed to have some important quality of life updates each filler patch, then people are less likely to make a big stink about the whole situation. Even though it isn't content, it is still improving the game in one way, shape, or form. What I have noticed about Genshin's quality of life updates is they usually come with big updates. However, it doesn't put quality of life updates in the filler patches all that much. A good portion of Genshin's most major updates have been during major updates. So if they could just pivot the time they release quality of life updates to like during filler patches, maybe that would make people less angry about filler patches. I don't think anyone's actually angry about them. I think people are just bored. Next, they could add the missing story quests. So many characters are missing either their second story quest, or just don't have a story quest at all. Or in the case of 4 stars, hangout quest. Why does only Noelle get 12 endings? And where's Kurosawa's hangout quest? But I wouldn't want this if the quality was going to get worse. When it comes to story quest and hangout quest, the story quality tends to be a hit or miss. Some story quests are really good, while others could use a little bit more work. Regardless, there's still characters that could use a story quest or hangout quest of their own, and I think hoyoverse needs to stop releasing story quests with the character. For the most part, if a character is getting a story quest, there's a high chance of them actually getting a rerun or just getting released. They need to start releasing quests. Hangout quests, for the most part, they get released. They don't really have a pattern for releasing hangout quests, but story quests, they are very much attached to the character getting released, which is a bit of a limitation. Rerun more old events. They could add more events to account for less content. I just want a rerun of Labyrinth Warriors and Wind Race. We get 4 events each update, 1 flagship one which tends to have 4 mini events inside of it, 1 combat event, and 2 mini games event. Usually hoyoverse is spin on a classic game. Most of the events are fun, but they do tend to take a short time to finish, which is a good and bad thing. Good, you don't have to spend too much time on the game to finish it. Bad, you don't get to spend too much time on the game. So they could either add more content to account for less content or make their content longer. Last but not least, permanent content. Genshin's main problem is that there is no endgame or permanent content for you to do after you finish the story and exploration and everything else. While there are things you could do while waiting for more things to come out, it would be nice to have something that is permanent to play during the lighter patches. They could make the domain Ingenuity, I think that's the name of that event, permanent, or they could make a Spiral Abyss but customizable by the community and co-op compatible event. They could make an event that's like that. I don't think we have one that's like that, but they could make one that's like that. There's so many things they could do. They can try making certain repeatable events permanent and make it like community-based content. In other words, they would just make the groundwork and the community will make all the content. That'd be so much better because we know what we want. We can make it as hard as we want, and hoyoverse doesn't have to worry about making content for us because we'll just make our own content. And the Genshin community, if there is one thing the Genshin community is really good at, it's being creative. So they won't have to worry about it. People can make it as hard as they want, people can make it as easy as they want, and joining them doesn't have to be compulsory. It can be just for fun. In conclusion, a filler update doesn't have to be a boring time, and it does help the player base and the developers that there are times when they can sort of catch up on everything, but there are ways to improve the player base's opinion and experience during these lighter patches. 4.5 is a filler update. 4.7 will also be a filler update. Just warning you now. Unless hoyoverse decides to change how their updates tend to work, 4.6 should have a map expansion, a second weekly boss, and an interlude chapter, which would mean 4.7 would be filler and 4.8 will be the summer events that come with a new map to explore. That's all I have for today. Subscribe and see you whenever.